All right. As always, good to have you here with us today. Okay, so this big cabinet meeting that took place yesterday, that featured all of the cabinet members, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. there, and he was talking about what he discovered at HHS, and there was nothing more jarring than when he described how many children were both sexually trafficked and then trafficked into forced labor here in the United States under the Biden administration. And that hundreds of thousands of these children, as you well know by now, have gone missing inside of our borders. Take a look. Here's RFK Jr. yesterday delivering staggering news right in front of the press.
We have ended HHS as the role as the vector, the principal vector in this country for child trafficking. And during the Biden administration, HHS became a collaborator in child trafficking and for sex and for slavery. And we have ended that, and we're very aggressively going out and trying to find these children, 300,000 children that were lost by the Biden administration.
300,000 children who have been lost by the Biden administration. HHS, again, the Department of Health and Human Services, you heard him say it, that HHS became the primary vector, the principal vector for sex trafficking and slave trafficking of children in the United States of America. Now, that is not in any way a small announcement from a government official. That's as big as it could possibly get. Now, you'll notice that we don't have 5 million headlines this morning on that subject, but we should. It's the biggest story of the day, I'd say, and a horrific tragedy that's going on in our country at the hands of this Biden administration. And this revelation by the HHS secretary, not the first time we've heard about this. We've known about this for some time, and I want to go back. This goes back to a New York Times article from February of 2023. Alone and exploited, migrant children work brutal jobs across the United States, was the report. And they talked about how kids were arriving in record numbers and ending up in dangerous jobs that violate child labor laws, including in factories that make products for well-known brands like Cheetos and Fruit of the Loom, that these kids were being brought in order to perform child labor. Now, the New York Times would continue its series and would explain that by April of 2023, a couple months later, that migrant children were being put to work and that the United States was ignoring the warnings. This is all under the Biden administration that this was going on. And they talk about over the past 2 years, more than 250,000 migrant children have come alone to the United States of America. Check this out. Thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, they wrote. Working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machinery in factories. All in violation of child labor laws. They say after the original piece was published in February in the New York Times, that was in 2023, the White House announced policy changes and crackdowns, supposedly. But they said there were signs all over the place of this explosive growth of the labor force of children and warnings that the Biden administration had ignored or missed. They say these were children that did not come into the country undetected. That, in fact, these children, the federal government knows that they're in the United States, knows that they are here. That's right. Here, I pulled out some notes for you from this. They knew they were here in the United States. And the Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for ensuring sponsors will support them and protect them from trafficking or exploitation. HHS is supposed to check on all of these kids by calling them a month after they begin living with their, quote, sponsors. And yet the agency couldn't reach some 85,000 of the children. Overall, the agency lost immediate contact with a third of all of the illegal kids that they brought into the country. Staff members revealed to the Times at the time that Javier Baccaria, was continuing to push to bring more kids into the United States, often asking why they couldn't discharge the children with machine-like efficiency. In fact, there's a video of Javier Becerra saying this. This is the former HHS secretary, not the guy who's cleaning it up right now. Javier Becerra was caught on camera talking to HHS officials saying, we need to bring children in more quickly, like an assembly line. Like, this has to be exactly like what Henry Ford set up. Take a look at Javier Becerra caught on this video.
If Henry Ford had seen this in his plans, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line. And kids aren't widgets, I get it. But we could do far better than this.
We can do far better than this. What he was referring to is accelerating them into the country. That's what he's saying. Don't let his tone confuse you. It wasn't about doing something good for kids. It was about accelerating them directly into the country. And under what conditions? Well, we know that kids who have been brought in this way have been sex trafficked. We know that children who have been brought in this way have been put into low-paid child labor. We know that kids who have been brought in this way have been put into indentured servitude. That is, they're paying off the debts of the smuggling that brought them into the United States in the first place by virtue of forced labor. We know that kids who have been brought in this way have been trafficked into slavery in the United States. And we now have hundreds of thousands of missing children in the United States of America, and you have RFK Jr. saying, we are unwinding this. We've ended this program. We've stopped this. Now, of course, here's what you and I want to see next. I want to see, and hopefully this is already happening, RFK make criminal referrals to the Justice Department so we can smack these guys down and we can drop them into the deepest, darkest pit we can find. This is the epitome of cruelty to what's happening to these kids. And they knew about it. They knew about it. In fact, there are written notes from Susan Rice from way back. She knew in 2021 about this. I'm going to show you a document here. Let me show you something here. This document, let me tighten in on this. Here we go. This is a document that Susan Rice hand-scrawled a note on in 2021. Let me move things around for you so you can see it. And there was a memo that went around detailing that that parents are sending in their, quote, unaccompanied children, sometimes called UCs. And she wrote on this in a handwritten note, this is BS, she wrote. What is leading to, quote, voluntary separation is our generosity to UCs, she wrote with an exclamation point. This is Susan Rice. This is January, very early in 2021, not January, but early 21. Writing that the reason so many children are being imported into the country right now is because of Biden administration policy that was incentivizing people to send them in. In other words, they knew. This wasn't ignorance. They knew. Susan Rice declared this working inside of the White House. And Javier Becerra said, it's not happening fast enough. We need these kids in faster. And then, of course, they lost track of them. They lost track of them. And so that's the state of play right now with the kids that were being brought into the United States. Now, let me tell you what has happened in the last 24 hours in addition to the RFK announcement. We just got a big statement from the FBI director, Kash Patel, that they've just busted a significant child exploitation ring here in the United States of America and around the world. This is what you want your FBI doing. This is precisely what you want these guys focused on. FBI Director Kash Patel saying late yesterday, working with the Justice Department and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, I can now report that the FBI and our partners have arrested 2 individuals on charges of operating an international child exploitation enterprise. This goes right back to, remember the Epstein files. We want more of the Epstein files. We want to know everybody here who is exploiting these kids, and we want to make sure that they can face consequences, especially powerful people who have taken advantage of the most vulnerable children. They deserve to face the chair for that. Here's FBI Director Kash Patel saying, we are now arresting child exploitation operators. He said, this is a significant case in our renewed mission to crack down on child sex exploitation and abuse, heinous crimes that no child or parent should ever be faced with. We believe these two individuals are leaders within a violent online network known as 764, which often targets minors, he explains. They will now face justice. Thank you to all who assisted. The FBI will never stop working to pursue, find, and bring to justice those who harm innocent children. Okay, so the FBI making these arrests. It's a big deal. We get further information here from the Justice Department's own website, indicating that these leaders were just arrested, charged for operating global child exploitation enterprise. Among them is a guy called Leonidas Varagianis, known by the nickname War, a 21-year-old. He's a U.S. citizen. He's been hiding in Greece. Another guy, Prasan Nepal, known as Trippy, that's his nickname, from High Point, North Carolina, have been charged with crimes for operating this international child exploitation enterprise in connection with what they call a nihilistic, violent extremist network known as 764. Nepal was arrested just a couple days ago. That was April 22nd in North Carolina. Varagianis was just arrested 2 days ago now in Greece. So they got both of these guys. They say it's a violent online network that is seeking to destroy civilized society by corrupting children. What I'm about to read to you is their effort to groom children into both self-harm, into sexual acts, into suicide, and into bringing down our society. It is a child grooming operation that they're describing. Pam Bondi quoted here saying these defendants are accused of orchestrating one of the most heinous online child exploitation enterprises we've ever encountered. A network built on terror, abuse, and the deliberate targeting of children. We will find those who exploit and abuse children, prosecute them, and then dismantle every part of their operation. Kash Patel going on here talking about how they're trying to stop all of this cruel abuse. And they're working with their partners to protect juveniles from predators. We will track them down. We will hold them accountable. U.S. Attorney for D.C. Ed Martin is a fantastic U.S. attorney. I've got more on that guy coming up. He says the allegations in this case are not just disturbing. They're every parent's nightmare. The number of victims and the depths of depravity are staggering, he says. Here's the allegations against the group. The defendants engaged in a coordinated criminal enterprise and led a larger subgroup within that organization, 764, through encrypted messaging applications. As alleged, they directed, participated in, and otherwise caused the production and distribution of child sexual abuse material, and they groomed, manipulated, and extorted children. The defendants allegedly ordered their victims to commit acts of self-harm and engaged in psychological torment and extreme violence against minors. The affidavit goes on to allege the group targeted vulnerable children on the internet. Parents, there's a warning in this for you. You need to keep vigilance over your children and their screen time. There are absolutely morally depraved strangers on the internet who want to raise your kids. They want to raise your kids. They want to groom your children. And what's being described in this statement by the Justice Department, in these allegations, are children who've been groomed on the internet by a violent, sexually abusive online ring that's composed of these two U.S. citizens that they just arrested. The affidavit alleges the group targeted vulnerable children online. They coerced them into producing degrading and explicit content under threat and manipulation. The content included cut signs and blood signs through which young minors would cut symbols into their bodies. More on this. I go to the actual complaint here. What they did. They had these kids carving members' names and things of this group into their bodies. That's what the cuts are that they're talking about. They were trying to convince people to commit suicide, these kids, pulling up some of the suicide references. Here's one where one of the defendants brags that he was able to get a girl to commit suicide. That's what they're doing in this. There's a lot of really disgraceful stuff inside of the criminal complaint here. including these guys getting children to perform sexual acts on themselves, on their siblings, children exploiting each other on video, using this material amongst their organization, sending it around like it's currency. These are the guys that the FBI just busted and has taken into custody in an international operation. Kash Patel announcing this. This is precisely what the FBI should be doing. There is no question that this is right there at the top of the list for what these guys need to do. And instead, what did the FBI do under the last administration? Well, they targeted Trump supporters. They targeted the very voters who are trying to stop this from happening. We've heard from FBI whistleblowers, like I think it was Steve Friend, actually, who was taken off of a case. They were taken off of child exploitation cases in order to concentrate on things like January 6th and targeting parents who go to school board meetings. And what were the parents doing who were going to the school board meetings? The parents were trying to prevent these schools from grooming their kids into the very kinds of demented ideologies that you see manifesting themselves inside of documentation like this. We have been betrayed by these agencies, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And so if you were looking for a changing of the guard, a change of pace, a righting of the ship, heading in the right direction, going after criminals, arresting evildoers, bringing them to justice, well, that's what's happening right now. That's what's happening right now. And it goes back to what I said last week about the FBI. I know there's a lot of just eagerness, of course, including from me, about seeing people arrested and seeing them brought to justice as quick as humanly possible. And the reality, of course, is inside of this FBI, this has to be a deliberative process. You can't look at the old FBI and say, well, because they abused power, we should abuse power too. No, you've got to do it the right way. We've got to get these guys arrested. We've got to take them off the streets, and we've got to protect these kids. And we're seeing the fruits of those labors right now. As of today, it's May 1st. These guys have not been in the job that long. What did I say about Kash Patel? He got there February 20th, I think, or February 21st. Dan Bongino got there March 17th. So we're just over a month now, about a month and a half that Dan Bongino's been there. And now we're watching some of the most vile criminals on the planet being arrested and brought to justice. And that doesn't even include the top 10 most wanted on the FBI's list. They've already brought in at least 3 of those guys. 3 off the top 10 list. This is what we want. This is what you voted for. And so we're seeing some of the fruits of those labors right now. First of all, how staggering is the video of Javier Baccaria saying, we just have to accelerate these kids into our country as fast as humanly possible. He compared himself to Henry Ford. Henry Ford, running an automobile assembly line. He revolutionized the assembly line. Javier Becerra, quite unfortunately, revolutionized the child slave trafficking assembly line into the United States of America. And I remember the New York Times piece because when I covered it at the time. I covered it at the time when it came out, and I said, look at what is going on. These kids are being brought into the country and being put into conditions of slavery and child labor and sex trafficking. And the Biden administration just kept making it happen. I covered the Susan Rice disclosures at the time, where she had scribbled onto that piece of paper that it was the Biden administration's policies that are making all this happen. But somehow it escaped me that there was a video of Becerra saying it and bragging about it. Can we put that video up one more time? I just want people to see this. I just think this is one of the most important videos that really didn't get the attention in a deeply scandalous administration. Cut to, again, Javier Becerra saying, I'm rushing children into the United States.
If Henry Ford had seen this in his plans, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line. And kids aren't widgets, I get it. But we could do far better than this.
I started today by mentioning that this was a huge statement by RFK Jr., that he was able to stop all of this when he got to HHS. And I also said to you, you're not seeing a million headlines on this subject this morning. Why is that? Why is that? Why can't the press cover this? Why am I covering this with any intensity and the rest of the media are not? They're not covering. The legacy press isn't touching this. So some of this is, maybe they're perfectly comfortable with it. I think that's the easiest answer. They're perfectly comfortable with it. They don't care. They've convinced themselves that this is right, that we should import all these kids into the country. They mount these reflexive defenses of Democrats, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that Democrats are on the side of evil. This is the side of evil. That's right. Animal 008 says the press is complicit. Cheerio, they are complicit. They won't cover it because it's true, says Mayhem. Yeah, no, it's this is one of the biggest stories on the planet. Over 300,000 children remain missing. And I'm distraught thinking about the conditions that they're living under right now. So those are the receipts. That's what's happening right now. We're going to keep trying. I got to get this interview at some point with RFK Jr. We're going to have a chat with him. But I want to know about the criminal referrals. I want to know what they're doing as they track these guys down. They get these cases into the hands of the Justice Department and let guys like Cash and Dan go to work. Let them go to work. If you let these guys go to work, they will bring about justice. That's all I'm saying. So massive story. I know you've been all over this. This is a great audience, very focused on this. We'll stay on this story too. Hey, that cabinet meeting yesterday included some other fascinating details that are worth getting into. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he revealed that inside of the Secretary of State, they've been keeping, that under the Biden administration, they were keeping dossiers on all sorts of people to target specifically for censorship. And this is the United States State Department targeting American citizens for censorship, just in case you're wondering how far afield they are from their mission. Here's Marco Rubio talking about one person sitting at that table yesterday with the whole presidential cabinet was uniquely targeted for this kind of censorship. Take a look at the Secretary of State.
Something else we got out of the business of, wasn't widely reported, or maybe it was. We had an office in the Department of State whose job it was to censor Americans. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not going to say who it is. I'll leave it up to them. There's at least one person at this table today who had a dossier in that building of social media posts to identify them as purveyors of disinformation. We have these dossiers. We are going to be turning those over to these individuals.
Me or Elon? We can follow up with the media story.
Well, we are going to turn over these dossiers to the individuals, and they'll decide whether they want to disclose it or not. But just think about it. The Department of State of the United States had set up an office to monitor the social media posts and commentary of American citizens to identify them as vectors of disinformation, when we know that the best way to combat disinformation is freedom of speech and transparency. And so that's what we're going to be in the business of doing. We're not going to have an office that does that.
Okay, so somebody in that room was being targeted by a dossier designed to censor that person and to prevent them from communicating with the broader public, obviously. And so you heard a moment ago, you heard a joke from the vice president, from J.D. Vance, saying, was it me or was it Elon who was targeted? Kind of, I think, jokingly referring to that. But let me just go down. Fox wrote this up, and they do quote the relevant agency that Rubio appeared to be referring to. Rubio appeared to be referring to an office within the State Department previously known as the Global Engagement Center, which he officially shuttered earlier this month. But in the process of shuttering it, of course, they're looking through all the files and they're figuring out, okay, what are they going after here? Who are they going after? And Fox says, when announcing that massive reorganization of the State Department, the Global Engagement Center engaged with media outlets and platforms to censor speech that it disagreed with, Rubio explained. The center has been accused, rightfully so, by conservatives of censoring them. Journalist Matt Taibbi, for example, previously reported that the center, quote, funded a secret list of subcontractors and helped pioneer an insidious and idiotic new form of blacklisting during the pandemic. I think that's the key word. I have a prediction here. He added that the Global Engagement Center flagged accounts as Russian personas and proxies based on criteria like describing the coronavirus as an engineered bioweapon, blaming research conducted at the Wuhan Institute, and attributing the appearance of the virus to the CIA. Though Rubio did not identify which Trump official the Biden administration kept a dossier on, Elon Musk has previously railed against the Global Engagement Center. Now, I think Elon's a perfectly likely target, but I happen to think it's one of two people specifically who were targeted here. One of them is, yeah, you guessed it right, Clark, E.V. Clark, RFK. Because remember, the Biden administration, we already know, was directly working with Facebook in order to censor RFK Jr., to suppress his ability to communicate anything health-related during the pandemic. So I'm pretty convinced that it's very likely that RFK was the guy that they had the dossier on. And for a bunch of reasons. This is the Biden administration constantly targeting its political opponents, and RFK Jr. wanting to run at first as a Democrat. Well, yeah, he's a political opponent of Joe Biden. Remember the Biden treatment of RFK Jr. RFK Jr., a guy who was under threat of assassination attempts, which is par for the course for his whole family. And Joe Biden refused to give him Secret Service protection. Refused. He didn't want to dignify RFK's candidacy as real by giving him anything that made him look symbolically like a presidential candidate. That would be Secret Service protection. So they had it out for Bobby Kennedy. They hate RFK Jr. to the point that they recruited half of his family, if not more, to attack him in public. That's how insidious this became. So I would not be surprised if it's RFK Jr. who has the dossier on him inside of the United States State Department. The other person who might be the subject here, let me see if I can pull up a video to complement this, because there's one that comes to mind this morning that I want to share with you, is Tulsi Gabbard talking about the emergence of the virus from Wuhan. And okay, here it is. Here's the video. I'll share it with you. She just talked to Megyn Kelly about this, and she said she's been working with Jay Bhattacharya in the Trump administration now, as well as Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, talking about these dangerous labs where the United States is funding this ludicrous research to generate viruses that can kill humanity. And here's what she had to say on the subject.
But the thing that we are working with Jay Bhattacharya, the new NIH director, on with, as well as Secretary Kennedy, is looking at the gain of function research that, in the case of the Wuhan lab, as well as many of these other biolabs around the world, was actually U.S. funded and leads to this dangerous kind of research that, in many examples, has resulted in either a pandemic or some other major health crisis.
Well, let me ask you specifically, because we already know that EcoHealth Alliance was partnering with this Wuhan lab to do gain of function research.
That's right.
We just have never been, somebody say, it was that exact experiment that led to this COVID bug. But have we gotten there? What's the new thing that you're digging in on?
We are working on that with Jay Bhattacharya, and look forward to being able to share that hopefully very soon.
Okay.
And she also
That specific
link.
Correct, between the gain of function research and what we saw with COVID-19.
And then she would also go on to say in one of these clips that she was concerned about the biolabs in Ukraine. Tulsi, here you can see in this tweet here, she said this gain of function research is happening in biolabs around the world. I warned against U.S. funded biolabs in Ukraine when the Russia-Ukraine war kicked off for this very reason. Who knows what kinds of pathogens are in these labs, says Tulsi. And if released, it could create another COVID-like pandemic. You remember talking about those biolabs in Ukraine? Do you remember how forbidden that was when that first came up? And now here she is, Director of National Intelligence, saying, yeah, there are biolabs in Ukraine with deeply dangerous viruses that we need to get a hold of all of this. And so I would say my top two most likely in terms of being targeted here for these dossiers happen to be former Democrats who are now serving in the Trump administration. RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. Those seem the most likely. And boy, the left reserves special animus for former Democrats, don't they? If you leave their party, they will try to destroy your life. They will try to destroy everything about you. Hillary Clinton said that Tulsi Gabbard was a Russian agent. The Biden administration treated her as if she was a terrorist. They assigned air marshals to follow her on domestic airlines as a part of the Quiet Skies program. Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., to a lesser extent than President Trump, quite obviously, but still to a very high level, have been treated like utter garbage by a tyrannical government who hated them because of their politics. And now President Trump has taken all of these battle-hardened people and given them very important jobs inside of our government. HHS, to run HHS, it's one of the most important jobs in the entire country. And now RFK Jr., who was targeted by the Biden administration, is now in a position to do something good for our country, to make America healthy again. That's the mission he's been given. And Tulsi Gabbard, who was victimized by the intel community, well, now she's in charge of the intel community. It's amazing to watch, gratifying to watch, but a reminder that they've got a big job ahead of them. They've got a lot of mess to untangle here. We'll get back to more of this in a moment. I want to talk. I will talk with you about the reemergence of the ridiculous nominees for the Democrats' ticket last year. Old frickin' frack. Kamalama Ding Dong is back, and Tim Walz, who I saw Avita correctly assessed this morning, admitted this week that he was a DEI pick to run with Kamala Harris. These people are ridiculous, and I will emphasize just how ridiculous coming up. Hey, that includes that Kamala Harris has reemerged from her hidey hole. Kamalama Ding Dong gave a big speech yesterday, and the media spent all day hyping it. They were telling us that this was going to be epic. They said that this is the Associated Press's verbiage, by the way, that she was going to use a, quote, high-profile speech Wednesday to sharply criticize President Trump. Oh, boy. Kamala Harris is going to do something sharply for the first time in her political career. She will sharply criticize President Trump. So how exactly did that go? Well, she spent a lot of time getting stuck in these verbal cul-de-sacs that she always gets stuck in. Take a look here. Kamala Harris yesterday talking about America over and over.
And folks, what we are experiencing right now is exactly what they envisioned for America. Right now, we are living in their vision for America.
Wow. Wow. That was deep. Somebody should embroider that into a pillow or something, because that's the kind of thing I'm going to remember literally forever. What an amazing and insightful comment from the woman who almost became president of the United States. What a bullet we all dodged with that one. So that's just a small sample of how stupid this whole thing was yesterday. And by tomorrow, we definitely will have forgotten it. I'm only showing you today because I want to make fun of it. It's just so ridiculous. But they were acting yesterday like this Kamala Harris speech was going to be the devastating conclusion of the whole Trump administration. She is just going to plant a knife right in the ribs of the Trump administration. He'll never recover from it. And if that's the case, I don't think it worked. She had a moment yesterday where she was rambling all about elephants. She saw a viral video on the internet, and she wanted the audience to know that she has access to the internet and stupid viral videos. Here she is yesterday.
In fact, please allow me, friends, to digress for a moment. Okay. It's kind of dark in here, but I'm asking a show of hands. Who saw that video from a couple of weeks ago? The one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake?
Oh my gosh.
Google it if you've not seen it. So that scene has been on my mind. Everybody's asking me what you've been thinking about.
Hey, somebody just asked, do we really need to hear from her right now? Like, why are you showing this to us? Because I want to celebrate her descent into obscurity. I love this. I can't love it more. And I think it's the funniest thing ever. And I also love this idea that she's somehow some amazing savior for the Democrats. Oh, she's going to rescue us from Trump. Yeah, sure. You keep thinking that because she says garbage like this.
These days, well,
Oh my God. I'm so glad that we don't have to hear that. I was playing these clips this morning. I'm sitting in my kitchen. I was cutting these clips up for the show, going, "Oh my gosh, this is awful." And my lovely wife walked in. She had dropped the kid off at school. She walked back into the house and she hears me playing these clips, and then instantly she cringed. Instant. My wife's, it's her. And then she went upstairs and she was working, and I was downstairs. I was working. I was clipping more. And she's like, she told me afterwards, she's like, I realized I was cringing as I was listening to the clips from afar. I couldn't even hear what she was saying. And I was just, my face was contorting itself.
Video for those who haven't seen it. Here those elephants were.
Oh my God.
And as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other.
No, okay. Anyway, in other words, she did not destroy Trump yesterday. This was not some sort of sharp takedown of the Trump administration. She didn't rescue the Democrats from their political obscurity. Last one I'll play for you, and I just think it's totally typical for these Democrats. Totally typical. Kamala Harris name dropped a bunch of Democrats yesterday that she says typify the best in her party right now, the absolute best in her party. So who's on Kamala's top, what is this? Her top 7 list, her top 7 Democrats in the country. If I'm telling you right now, you should feel joy. If Democrats stick with this list, then they are destined for political obscurity forever. They're going to stay in the wilderness forever. Here she is yesterday.
And by leaders across the spectrum, including congressional leaders like Cory Booker, Chris Van Hollen, Chris Murphy, Jasmine Crockett, Maxwell Frost, AOC, and Bernie Sanders. All who? Wait.
Oh, yeah.
Have been speaking with moral clarity.
Oh, my goodness. Please stay on this list. These are, I said it on X today. Kamala just reeled off the single craziest list of Democrats, and it just said they were great, and it claims that they've been, quote, speaking with moral clarity about this moment. How much box wine led to this conclusion? This is fantastic. I hope they stick with this. That list, Cory Booker, Chris Van Hollen, Chris Murphy, Jasmine Crockett, Maxwell Frost, AOC, Bernie Sanders, you can't get nuttier than that. You can't get crazier than that. Now, you have people who are trying to be crazier than that, no question. But it's hard to get crazier than that. And these guys, everyone she just mentioned, these are people who are trying to bring back MS-13 gangsters into the United States of America. And I'm so tempted to jump around right now because I do have updates on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So we got another day has passed, and we have more evidence that Chris Van Hollen is getting hit squarely in the face by the rakes that he keeps stepping on. Look at this. Bill Malugin with this reporting. New, Fox News has now obtained a second protective order filed against Maryland man Kilmar Abrego Garcia by his wife in 2020, in which she accuses him of physical abuse, threatening her, says she has a recording where he says he's going to kill her, and if he does, quote, nobody can do anything to him. This was a full year before she filed that other protective order we talked about recently, in which she accused him of being a repeat wife beater and said she has videos of his violence and claimed that she is afraid to be around him. This is the hero of the left, this Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Bill Malugin runs down the checklist. Okay, look, he's a Salvadoran illegal. He's an alleged MS-13 gang member. Immigration court keeps concluding that. He's accused of being a repeat wife beater, domestic abuser by his own wife multiple times. He's suspected of human trafficking in Tennessee while driving convicted human traffickers with 8 people and no luggage in a vehicle that was already owned by a convicted human trafficker. Yeah. And then in case you're looking for the actual receipts, here they are. This is the receipt where she is alleging how violent her husband Kilmar is and what he's been doing. And here highlighted by Bill Malhusian, I've recorded that he's told my ex-mother-in-law that even if he kills me, no one can do anything to him. No one can do anything to him. So have I been saying this? Every single day we get another piece of evidence for why Kilmar Abrego Garcia is the worst possible person in the world for the left to be defending, and they're still doing it. They're still doing it. In fact, yesterday we got another piece of evidence on this subject. The nominee to run the Drug Enforcement Agency under the Trump administration, he had a career as a DEA agent where he was monitoring this kind of drug activity, this type of gang activity. And he was asked yesterday by Lindsey Graham whether or not the tattoos on the dude's fingers amount to MS-13 tattoos. I hope Terry Moran at ABC was watching this. Check out Cut 4, the DEA nominee weighing in on this subject.
Based on your time as a DEA agent in the field, particularly in Mexico, these tattoos are consistent with MS-13 associations.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Do you know of any other set of combinations that would suggest some other organization this represents?
With this particular one, no, sir.
No, there's no other organization that would possibly represent. That's MS-13, which I believe is exactly what President Trump kept saying to that goofy guy, Terry Moran from ABC. And there you go. So now you get somebody who's an expert on this subject affirming in sworn congressional testimony, yeah, those are MS-13 tattoos. There's no doubt about that. And then lastly, some of you have noticed in the chat what I talked about yesterday, noted in the chat today, what I talked about yesterday. This lady's old baby daddy was fighting for custody of his own children, trying to get them out of that house in his own emergency court filing in Prince George's County, Maryland, saying they're living with a gang member. My children are living with a gang member, he said. And of course, one more. She keeps covering up the gang tattoos in social media. Every time you see the gang tattoos on the knuckles, she covers them in hearts so that nobody can see that he's got MS-13 tattoos on his knuckles. So, yeah, this is the guy all these idiots keep defending. They keep defending. Let's see. What do we want next? All right, I'm going to ask the audience here. Do you want me to do Tim Walz or Hank Johnson next? Tim Walz or Hank Johnson, because I have an epic video of both. I know. It's an amazing choice. Not every day you get an amazing choice like this. Either tampon Tim Walz or Guam could capsize if too many people stand on one side of it, Hank Johnson. I'm getting, the Tim ones are coming in a little late. Hank Johnson. All right, we'll go to Hank next. We've got some good Hank Johnson for you. And it connects really nicely. Thank you for that. This segues really nicely because it connects directly to the Kilmar Abrego Garcia story. Tim Walz is making a comparison here that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is basically the Jews that were targeted by the Nazis. This is Hank Johnson saying this. Did I say Tim Walz? Hank Johnson is saying this. Take a look at this deeply ridiculous but totally typical for Hank Johnson video from Congress with a little bit of music accompaniment added by the great Justin.
First, they came for the Latinos outside of the Home Depots trying to get work so that they could feed their families. And I didn't say anything about it because I'm not a Latino at the Home Depot. Then they came for the Hispanic-looking folks wearing hats backward with tattoos, and they deported them to El Salvador. And I didn't say anything about that because I don't wear my hair backward.
My hair backwards?
I don't have any tattoos, and I don't look like a Latino. Then they came for the Latinas at home taking care of the children.
Latinx?
Scooped up the Latinas and the children, some of whom were American citizens, one of whom was receiving treatment for cancer. They swept them up, took them off, and deported them. And I didn't say anything about it because I'm not a Latina.
Oh my God.
I'm not a little child who's an American citizen. Then they came back for the
Oh my gosh, he's still going.
studying on the college campuses who were here on student visas.
This is a real person.
They sent jackbooted thugs wearing masks, pick them up, take them thousands of miles away and put them in a private for-profit detention center where they languish at taxpayer expense. And I didn't say anything about it because I'm not a student.
It sounds like he's saying a lot about it, actually.
And then they came and arrested a white female judge.
Oh my
state
goodness.
court judge presiding over her courtroom
I love this.
and the litigants therein,
I love this so
managing
much.
the affairs of her court. And they came and arrested her and perp walked her.
These are all wins.
jail. And I didn't say anything then because I'm not a judge, a white female.
He's still talking
judge.
about it, actually.
But then
Then what?
it came for me. And I looked around and there was nobody left because I had remained silent and they had taken everybody off.
Oh, that is priceless. So what he just rattled off was a series of tremendous victories on the part of the Trump administration. First, they came for that criminal, and then they came for the next criminal, and then they came for the next criminal, and then they came for me. Boy, I don't think you want to be a part of that list, Hank Johnson. What are you saying exactly? That is amazing. That is truly amazing.
Man, that was long, but I just
fantastic
couldn't
stuff.
stop. That was awesome.
That was so rewarding. Every second of that brought me joy. Song to my heart, tear to my eye. I loved I loved that. Hank Johnson, baby. That guy always delivers. Maybe he should have been on the list of crazy people that Kamala Harris reeled off yesterday. All right. Well, finally, I do have a Tim Walz video for those of you who are asking. He says that he's the white guy whisperer, and as the great Evita announced earlier, revealed that he was a DEI pick to be vice president of the United States. Thankfully, that never happened. But he was the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats because they didn't want to go with Josh Shapiro because their party's too anti-Semitic to support a Jewish running mate. So they went with Tampon Tim Walz, who is a, as you know, symbol of masculinity. Take a look at Tim Walz here, cut 8.
Look, my job was to do it. Look, I knew I was on the ticket. I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
That guy can't load a shotgun. Remember when they went hunting? He didn't shoot a single thing. He didn't even fire the gun once. He was having trouble loading his shotgun wearing his high-vis hunting vest that he just cracked out of the plastic and wore for the first time in his entire life. Yeah, he's the white guy whisperer, he says. There he is, hunting wabbits. Oh, man, there's Elmer Fudd. Although Elmer Fudd was way more masculine than Tim Walz. There he is. We dodged a shotgun shell by not letting that guy become vice president of the United States. I'm telling you, I love it. I love it. It brings me so much joy. You bring me joy, the best audience in media. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Thanks for all the Vince emotes. I appreciate those. I'll be back with you tomorrow for a Friday edition of Vince. Again, great to have you here.